Good evening all, and welcome. What are demons? And shadow people for that matter? Could they be one and the same? Or something entirely different? Why don't we find out together? Follow me on Twitter, and let the darkness take control. I saw a shadow person once. I didn't know that's what it was until much later. I was living in a house in Laguna Beach that had been there since the 1920s. In its history, it had been a speakeasy, a brothel, and a house for smuggling illegal immigrants. One day, my new wife and I were having an argument. I can't even recall what it was about. She walked down the block to get a cup of coffee and cool off, and I was home alone in the house. The way the place was built was incredibly haphazard. There was a bedroom and living room on one side, then a bathroom with two entrances on the other side. On the other side of the bathroom was a hallway that had windows in one side and two bedrooms on the other. From my bedroom, I could look across the hall into the bathroom, then through the bathroom and down the other hall. I was standing at my dresser, and I just noticed movement from the corner of my eye. I looked down, and there was, honest to God, a black figure. It gives me chills just remembering this. It was about 3 feet tall and vaguely humanoid. It looked like a black scribble, like someone had scribbled a human shape, but the scribbles moved, like electricity arcing. That's the best way to describe it. There was no sound that I could remember. I distinctly remember when I saw it, I wasn't afraid, I was just like, what? Then it noticed me looking at it. I can't say it turned around, it just focused on me, and then I was scared. I didn't move, I didn't scream, nothing. I was just frozen, because it just came at me, rushing down the hallway towards me. I have no idea what it intended, but as soon as it entered the bathroom, the door closest to me just slammed shut on its own. Then I screamed. I yelled for my wife. She wasn't home, and I went the hell out into the daylight and didn't go back until she got home about 10 minutes later. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe I saw something supernatural. But I do know I saw something. I just don't know what it is. This takes place at my childhood home, which sat on the edge of the woods. To separate the woods from the yard, my dad placed large boulders along the tree line. There was also a large mound of dirt from the foundation of the home in the woods. My youngest brother walks with a limp and was rather short and pudgy at the time. These details are important for later. I was about 12 when it started. My two brothers, Jerry and Joe, their friend Nate, and I were playing hide and seek around the house. The entire property was fair game, woods included, and my youngest brother Joe was it, and me and the other two boys hid behind the dirt mound. We waited there for about 15 minutes and started getting worried because he never came looking for us. I remember volunteering to find him and ran all around the property but never did find him. I went inside and he was playing a board game with some other friends. Okay, no big deal. I asked an adult how long he had been inside and they said about half hour. I ran back outside to tell the others. When I got to the hiding spot, they were laughing. They asked how I got away from Joe. I told them that he had been inside the entire time. They stopped laughing and looked at each other. I asked what was going on. Turns out they saw what they thought was Joe running behind me in the woods. As I reached the rocks, he disappeared. We saw him around a lot, but kind of ignored it, chalked it up to kids' imaginations, and played in the woods in groups. A few years later, we had another friend come over who'd never been to my house. We were all playing inside when he came into the room and asked why Joe was playing in the woods alone. We explained that Joe was at a friend's house and there was no way it was him. He insisted it was, and we asked him who told him about the man, and he had no idea what we were talking about. It still creeps me out. When I was 18, I purchased my first home. It was a small rundown foreclosure home that I got for next to nothing, a perfect fixer-upper for my young son and I. My dad is a carpenter, and so he was able to do most of the updates for me before we moved in. Dad didn't tell me outright that anything supernatural ever happened to him, but on one occasion when I arrived to the house to help out, he asked me, "Was that you a little bit ago?" "No, I just got here," I replied, and he just shrugged. The other time he was under the house working on something and he kept hearing footsteps above him. Convinced it was my mum or I, he yelled a few times before assuming we couldn't hear him and gave up. I didn't chalk these up to paranormal experiences before, because I'd never had a paranormal experience and I wasn't even sure if I believed in them. Once my son and I moved into the house, I slowly started noticing odd occurrences. I constantly was thinking I heard the door to the breezeway open and close, and the sound of shuffling as if someone was arriving home. But of course, no one was ever there. The sound of footsteps upstairs was also very common. The first time my boyfriend came to the house and stayed the night, we were fast asleep when the stereo came on at full blast, scaring the hell out of us. The next morning we were sitting at the bar in the kitchen having breakfast, and we began discussing the previous night's events, and then my boyfriend proclaimed, "If there's really something in this house, I wish it would just show itself." As soon as he finished his sentence, we heard a loud crash, and we turned to look. A mini cooler was tumbling down the stairs with enough force that it left a dent in the wall at the bottom of the staircase. Another time, my boyfriend, our son, and myself were all sleeping in that living room. It was a very hot summer, and we didn't have central air conditioning at the time, so we had pulled the mattresses out on the living room floor where the window AC unit was. Around 3 a.m., we woke up to the sound of an alarm clock going off. We didn't use an alarm clock, so we jumped up to try and find the source of the noise so that it wouldn't wake our son. I'll never forget when I found it. I followed the noise to a plastic bag that was beside the couch that had some of my boyfriend's belongings in it, and pulled out an alarm clock. I was frantically hitting buttons trying to get it to stop before I decided to just unplug it. When I grabbed the cord, I realized it wasn't plugged into anything at all. I just held it, staring at it, and held it for my boyfriend to see before it stopped just as suddenly as it had started. The next day he inspected the clock, convinced it had batteries in it, but it didn't even have a battery compartment. This final story was the one that scared me the most. I was in the living room watching TV while my son slept upstairs. The baby monitor was beside me, and from my position, I could look straight up the stairs and see the door to my son's room. Well out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow dart across the upstairs hallway, and simultaneously there was a short burst of static interference on the baby monitor. The hairs on my arms stood straight up, and I stared up the stairs at my son's door. The hallway was illuminated by a nightlight, and my son's door was white, so I could see it fairly well. It looked like a head was peeking out from across the room to the hallway from my son's door, but I thought surely it was my imagination. Until after about a minute it stepped out. The thing that terrifies me the most was that it didn't glide across the floor like you see in the movies. Its movements were so human-like and distinct, and three-dimensional, that if it hadn't have been a black, stark silhouette, I would have thought it were an intruder. It stepped out the doorway and took a few steps across the hall to my son's door, then turned its head like it wanted to check if I was watching before it stuck its head in, and shoulders through my son's door as if to have a peek, to see what was in there. When it did, I mustered all the courage I could and just yelled out, "No!" and it pulled its head out and quickly dematerialized in such a strange way. It was like it shrunk into itself until there was nothing left. I have goosebumps just sharing this. I bounded up the stairs, grabbed my son, and left immediately. I stayed the night at my mum's house for about a week after that. Eventually I sold that house, and I've never had a chance to ask the owners if they've ever had any strange experiences there themselves. When I was a kid, I saw something. I was laying in my bed, the room door in front of me wide open, and to the left I could see the room where the front door was. There was an antique cabinet that my dad had that illuminated a white glow. I started to freak out for no reason and started sweating. I, for some reason, knew crap was about to happen and I was about to witness something. About 5 minutes later, hot in sweat, I saw it. There was a door in the back of the room with the front door that was storage. A black, outlined humanoid figure walks out, mildly static looking. It takes a few steps towards the front door, then stops, does a military-like turn and faces me. At this point, I'm losing it. It walked into my room and stops beside my bed, does one more military turn facing me, and at that point I figure, what have I got to lose? I noped the hell out and ran through the thing, ran upstairs to my parents' bedroom and knocked furiously at the door, waiting for them to let me in. My eyes focused on the stairs, making sure it wasn't to follow me. Nothing. I slept with my parents the next few nights. It's one of the scariest things that happened to me as a child. A short time after the shadow people encounter, I began to settle down, and my thoughts were no longer fearful. I also believe this was during the time I put up a dream catcher that my mother got me. Let's just say the dream catcher really did the job for years, maybe because I truly believed in it and my mind worked in its favor. One day I woke up in the morning to Mum yelling down the stairs for me to get up. It was a school day. I had a shower, came back to my room and sat on my bed, sluggishly slipping on my school uniform. And this is when it gets creepy. As I was pulling up my socks, I noticed a flash outside my door, more towards the room with the front door. Not the bright camera type flash, but more like an invisible person walking past super fast my front door. For those of you who have played Halo, it looks like someone walking around with the invisibility cloak, but real fast past my door. You can still see them, but not entirely. I saw this from the corner of my eye and began to freak out. I went upstairs to eat breakfast and remember how scared I was, and sat there staring down at the table as I ate my cereal. My mother asked what was up, and I looked up at her with a straight face and said something along the lines of, "I saw a flash by the door downstairs. Something walked past my door." I said this calmly and with a straight face, and now that I look back, it must have looked like I was the classic creepy kid. My mum just said, "It's all in your head," and I went back to eating, and she went to the laundry room behind the kitchen. And that's when it happened again. I was eating when I saw another flash of an invisible person walk past the kitchen door. This time I was paralyzed, as in I stopped chewing and was now staring straight down at the table. Whatever these things were, they were playing with me. My mum walks in, stops, sees my reaction, and again I calmly say, "It just did it again. Over there," pointing at the kitchen threshold. I tell my mum that something's playing with me and that I'm not imagining things. What really relieved me but freaked me out at the same time was her reply, "I know." It relieved me because she believed me, but she freaked me out because she basically confirmed their existence. About 10 seconds later, we both heard someone walking down the stairs. They're wooden, so the creaks can be heard. It was very slow. I remember thinking to myself it sounded as if their cover's blown and they're trying to sneak out. My mum and I both looked at each other, and once we heard it, it stopped. She looked around the corner down the stairs and there was nothing. Dad had already left for work. My Filipino cousins, as I'm half Filipino, and I were gathered around the TV. Some of them on the floor, one on the back couch and me on the couch by the sliding door. We were all watching either a game show or something overly bubbly. At the time it was getting late for us, about 10 p.m. or so. And here's where the realest stuff goes down. I'm sitting on the couch with my legs up and one knee up. The remote is dangling on the backrest, edge to the right, and I hear it drop behind me. So little me, being the ninja I am, slides over to the top of the couch on my back, like a bridge stretched for your back, with my face pressed up against the glass. I grab the remote, and from the corner of my eye I see a little girl with black hair. She had a white dress on and was looking down, so I couldn't see her face. She was in a crawling position, backing up like she'd been caught trying to escape. She was backing up towards the middle of the room, towards the Christmas tree. I was still upside down at this point when I managed to look over at her and she vanished. I scuttled right back up and then jumped. All my cousins looked at me in confusion, and then I explained to them what I saw, and they basically started shaking their fingers and pointing at me, as if they knew that I must have done something to see something. They were smiling though, as if it were a completely normal thing to experience. To this day, I still think that they were just messing with me with the whole "you got in trouble with the supernatural," but I know what I saw. I've always been scared crapless whenever I was in the Philippines, especially that house. In the area we live in, Betis, this house was like a mansion. It was opposite some basketball courts, in case anyone knows Betis. Anyway, if anyone ever goes to the Philippines, be sure to ask the locals for some supernatural stories. I'd imagine people there have had their share, as all my Filipino relatives have, including our maids. One maid ran away once because of an encounter. She came back, and I've met her before, but she just hates talking about it. One day I wasn't feeling that well at work, so I asked my bosses and they told me I could leave early. I was getting a really bad migraine. On my way home, I turned on my high beams. The back road I was on has no streetlights, and it was around midnight. My headlights lit up all the tall trees on the road, and I could see perfect colors with my lights. Out of nowhere, this figure walks out of the side of the road, solid black, not transparent and no details, just literally black, around 6 foot tall, and had what I can only describe as flashlight eyes. He just stared at me. I couldn't see any other details, even with high beams on, just his eyes. No nose, mouth, ears, even an outline. He was just a solid black silhouette. And then he just turned and ran into the forest at an unnatural speed. I thought I was seeing things, and I went home to my fiancé shaking. I was too scared to get out the car. He tried calming me down and making me feel better, and he said maybe I was just tired and seeing things. Maybe it was nighttime hypnosis. A few days later, we had friends over. We're sitting there scrolling through apps looking for a good movie to watch, and I look at my fiancé and friend, and they both turn and look out the back door window. They jump up screaming. My friend ran to me with tears streaming down her cheeks, and I was confused. My fiancé ran into the other room, grabbed a gun, and ran out the back door. A few moments later, he came back in shaking. I asked him what was wrong. I was severely confused at this point because we have a 6 foot tall wooden fence, and I was trying to tell them animals can't get into our backyard without making a lot of noise if they tried. They both at the same time told me, flashlight eyes. I thought they were pranking me, and my friend wouldn't sleep in any of our guest rooms because of it being near the window, and we all ended up sleeping in the living room together. I haven't seen flashlight eyes since. What could he possibly be? I've looked up ghosts, cryptids, demons, everything. It looks like it's the rake, but from as far as I can tell, that's supposed to be white. It was a bit like the rake but solid black with no detail or anything. Like a child's drawing if they filled in a character with a black shape. And then its shining eyes. I didn't believe in the paranormal until this incident. My first sighting was 3 miles from my house. I don't know how this thing found me or kept up with me. I was going 50 miles an hour over hills and turns, scared out my mind. When I was in high school, my parents decided to relocate our family to a big house in what felt like the middle of nowhere. and I swear to you it was haunted. It's up on a hill, isolated with no neighbors around for miles. Just going up our driveway was pretty long. The previous owner had inherited the place from his parents who had died, but he lost the house after struggling with his addiction. The property was foreclosed, and there was all kinds of weird stuff drawn on the walls when we moved in, so we gutted and renovated the entire home. From what I learned watching Supernatural, renovation is apparently a surefire way to wake up any angry spirits. Well, I was already a pretty paranoid kid, but this new house crept me out to no end. It had large windows in every room that pointed to the groves. We didn't have any blinds or covers or drapes, so I always felt like I was being watched. I'd be home alone on multiple occasions and hear a cupboard door slam shut very loudly, or hear pounding footsteps going up and down the stairs. I would literally lock myself in the bathroom, the only room in the entire house without a window, until a family member came home when this happened. Just weird noises and always feeling like I'm being watched. The worst experience was when I went to attend a Halloween party in my junior year. I dropped off my sibling at the dance to realize I had left an important part of my costume behind. I drove back home to retrieve said item, and the moment I walked through the door, something just felt wrong. I was home alone, and the house was dark. My body entered fight or fright mode, and for no apparent reason, I felt totally freaked out. So I ran inside, grabbed what I needed, and ran back to my car at record speed. As I raced down the driveway, shaking and crying, my nerves a complete mess, I looked behind me and saw that a dark figure was standing in the window of our house, watching me. Now I don't know how. I knew the figure was there, but my body sensed it before I actually saw him in the window. I'm just glad I got out in time, and I sure as hell didn't sleep that night. I still get freaked out just thinking about it, and I'm glad that I don't live there anymore, because it just had such negative energy about it. I also want to add something completely different, but somewhat related. One of my classmates was obsessed with Michael Jackson, and one day in class he kept telling everyone that Michael Jackson was going to die tomorrow. Sure enough, the next day, the news announced that he had passed. I grew up in a very small, strange, almost cultish Christian church. It was labeled non-denominational. They were pretty out there in what they believed. After the service every week, for anywhere between 3 to 5 hours, everyone stayed to receive prayer. On many occasions, there were exorcisms performed during this time. I personally witnessed people I'd known my entire life going into trance-like seizures with evil voices coming out their mouths. These voices made the hair on my neck stand on end. I knew they were really demons because they were so opposite of anything these people would say in real life. It was pure evil. I saw these people screaming, writhing, and foaming at the mouths. I was horrified. I would never forget the screams. There's no question in my mind, I was seeing demons. One time in particular, I remember this incident with a member of the church called Sam, who was a father of a few of our friends. He was a very nice, funny man, and all the kids liked him a lot. One day he received prayer, and demons began to manifest out of him. It got so intense, the kids were sent out of the room, but we all listened at the door, and this man screamed like he was being murdered. We were scared, crying, thinking he was going to die. I was 8 years old. We left this church when I was around 10, and about a decade later I sort of walked away from religion in order to find what I really believed in. I'm going to share with you an incident that I've never told anyone except my therapist, because I'm afraid they'll think I'm insane. This occurred during my period of searching and questioning religion, when I was 24 and just married. My mother-in-law invited me to what she called a deliverance service that she had attended the previous week. She said that it helped her heal from many painful experiences in her past. I'd been having a rough time for many years dealing with depression and unhealed childhood trauma, so I decided to give it a try. I certainly did not believe anything would come of it, and I just wanted to make her happy, to be honest. We got there, and the people who seemed like normal members of a regular run-the-mill church congregation greeted us. There were about 20 people. We listened to a sermon, nothing strange. And then everyone paired off for prayer time. I was paired with this little old lady and a very kind face and soft voice. She said she was going to pray for me, and I was thinking, okay, whatever. She's really sweet, and I'll just be nice and let her think she's helping me. I sat down in front of her on one of those cheap metal folding chairs that you find at an AA meeting, and she didn't try to take my hand or touch me, which I appreciated. She began by having me name people in my life who had greatly impacted me. People like my immediate family members. I'm shaking and feeling sick just remembering this. It's very hard to get off my chest. What happened next haunts me to this day. She started to pray for deliverance from any negative ties or curses that had been passed to me. Inadvertently, of course, through my family members, her voice, so kind and soft, was nevertheless demanding, like she wasn't going to take crap from these evil forces, and they had to do what she said. I didn't feel anything at first, and didn't expect to, so things were going exactly as I'd imagined. Then she got to my grandma, who had recently passed. As she prayed, my eyelids began to blink rapidly without my control. Okay, that was weird, I thought, but nothing too creepy. Maybe it was just a muscle or twitch. Then she prays about my father. My father suffers deep depression, which I have inherited from him, and as she prays, I began to sob uncontrollably. There was no emotion attached, and I was just doing the act of crying loudly and bitterly, but feel nothing and have no control over the tears. I was just sort of crying like you do when you're absolutely broken-hearted. When my fit of sobbing was over, she said, "Sometimes demons come out through tears." This was pretty scary, but was worlds away from the sort of thing you'd see in The Exorcist. So she carried on. I shrugged it off. I don't remember who she prayed about next, but all I know is the next time she prayed for me, my body seized up and became rigid. I couldn't move, but I was very conscious in my mind and knew that I should be able to move. But it was like something inside me was locking my muscles up. This got worse and worse and more intense until I was almost falling off the chair. My legs began to shake violently, even throwing one of my shoes off. My body was stiff as a board, and the top of my butt was still sitting in the chair, but the rest of me had slid out of it, creating a triangle of space between my body and the chair. I was seconds from falling out of it and onto the hard concrete floor. My head was thrown back as horrible groans came out my mouth. Meanwhile, I was totally conscious of everything in my mind and thinking rationally. Only my body was out of control. As she prayed, repeating that demons had to leave in Jesus' name, eventually my body was freed from this strange grip, and I was able to sit up again. I went home dazed, and when I looked in the mirror, my face looked different. It was like I had a light bulb on the inside of my face, where previously there had been a regular face. Now it appeared to be glowing. The glow lasted for about a day, and then the next morning I also noticed a bruise on the back of my head, from where the hair clip had dug into my scalp when my head was pressed back against the folding chair. This is how I know for sure that I had not been in control of my body. I had been in pain and terrified out my mind. I was not able to control any of my movements during that prayer time. I have no history of seizures whatsoever, and nothing even remotely close to that has ever happened to me before or since. Meanwhile, back to the deliverance sermon, during all of this, I could hear my mother-in-law being prayed for behind me. Suddenly, the most evil and vile voice I've ever heard came out of her mouth, cackling like a witch from a scary movie. My mother-in-law is partially deaf, and she was seeking to be healed from this. The demon that spoke out of her mouth said, "La la la, I can't hear you," in this wickedly evil mocking voice. It was the same thing that a little kid does and says when they put their finger on their ear and doesn't want to hear what you're saying. There was also filthy language coming out of her mouth. Words I don't think she's ever said before or since. My mother-in-law later said that this was the demon keeping her from hearing properly, but it was not driven out completely because she still has bad hearing. All I can say about this experience is that it's 100% true. A skeptic, non-religious person like me actually experienced, felt, and heard and saw all of this. Make of that what you will. But I know now that evil is real, and to some degree, lives inside us all. This is a true story. My wife and I will swear to it in front of any person on the planet. We lived in a fairly new, double-wide mobile home that sits on a spot that has never had any house of any kind on it, and is at least half a mile from anywhere any houses have ever sat. So you would not think that it's a likely location for a haunting. However, my wife and I have on this occasion seen some rather strange things here and there, the most of which I will relate to here. One night after an uneventful day, my wife and I retired for the night. We sleep in a large waterbed. Some time had passed and I was unable to sleep. My wife's breathing had become regular and reached a point where I assumed she was asleep. It must be also known that we leave a light on in the bathroom furthest from our bedroom because we normally have children in the house. However, that night, there was no one in the house except for my wife and I. But the light was on as usual, casting a glow through our open bedroom door, which weakly lit it. While lying there, unable to sleep, I became aware of a presence, and suddenly, and silently, a figure moved through our bedroom door and proceeded parallel to our bed. Then, rounding the corner of our bed, took up a fixed position at the foot of our bed. I was aware that this entity was conscious of us and was intently watching us as we lay there. The entity can best be described as something that had the appearance of black smoke or a shadow. However, it was more material than either of these, but less material than a real person. The most odd thing about this was my lack of fear. Although I was actually aware of this being and the fact it was not of this earth as we perceived it, it did not seem to arouse any fear response to me. I would say it aroused a feeling that would fit somewhere between creepy, awed, and curious, especially considering the fact that it was aware of me and I was aware of it. After some time, I almost convinced myself that I was imagining it, but then I became aware of the fact that my wife was no longer breathing like she was asleep, but was breathing almost silently. I then said, "Honey, you awake?" To which she answered, "Yes." Then I said, "Do you see anything?" Expecting her to reply to be, "What do you mean?" But much to my surprise, she said, "You mean the thing standing at the foot of our bed?" At this time, I did become somewhat nervous. We lay there for about 10 minutes, and then it was gone. It just over a period of about 10 seconds became less solid and our perception of it became weaker until it simply wasn't there anymore. Then it was as if it had never been there at all. Nothing like this has ever happened since, and the only evidence it ever existed are mine and my wife's memories of it. For context, my brother has always said something follows him. Jay was diagnosed with schizophrenia and low bipolar disorder. He has heavy drinking and drug habits, the worst luck you've ever seen, and extremely accident-prone to injury. This night is the scariest encounter with Jay's demons. The night is cold, and my friend Becky and I decide to smoke pop for the first time. We made a fire by the river. It began to sprinkle a little, but there's so many trees by the river that we really never felt anything from the natural tree canopy. It had only been about 30 minutes, and we decided to make a fire. The night so far was proving to be pretty fun. That's until it happened. We hear a strange noise, then a loud cracking, almost like a tree falling over and snapping every branch. All three of our heads dart to the right as we see a 12-inch thick branch take on a massive weight as it's rocking from the force. I immediately felt this knot of dread in my stomach, No one spoke, just the noises from the river and crackling on the fire. The best way I can describe it is a large black void just landed on the branch. No silhouette, no brief glimpse from the light of the fire, just an absolute lack of light crashed through a thick old tree and landed on this branch. I can't tell you why, but in my head, I knew that it was looking at us and feared that if we moved, we'd be dead. 10 minutes must have flown by and it felt like hours, and I tried to break the silence, and my brother grabs my arm slowly and says, "Shut up," quickly and quietly. Fear has gripped my mind, and I can't help but stare back at this thing staring at us. And as quickly as it came, it shot back up through the trees, breaking more branches as it left. Like being freed from its grip, my brother shot out of his chair and starts running back to the house. My friend Becky and I followed quickly. We confirmed all the details with each other and rarely spoke of it. I don't know what it was, and I don't know what it wanted. I just know it's always followed my brother, either messing with him or slamming doors, and it still persists to haunt him to this very day. Anyone with advice? I would greatly appreciate it. Well, I was in a room in my house at night, and I had the lights out and a candle lit on a table roughly in the middle of the room. The candlelight was causing all the normal things in the room to cast shadows. However, on one wall, there wasn't anything but a box against it. And I might also add, there was nothing between the candle and that wall but the box. So on that wall was a box up against it, and the box's shadow. Well, at some point I looked up, and there was a shadow of a man sitting on the box, but there was no one else in the room but me, and it wasn't my shadow. The shadow of the man was very clear. I blinked and rubbed my eyes. I even looked away several times, and when I would look back it was still there. It was motionless. It stayed for several minutes, and I was pretty much frozen in shock and fear. Eventually I looked over and it was gone. Just the box and its shadow remaining. I'd like to add I was an extreme skeptic. I pretty much didn't trust anybody's account of the paranormal. I did not believe in ghosts nor shadow people, but since the incidents, things have changed. But for me, nothing short of seeing something for myself was going to make me a believer, and I never expected it to happen. Now I know that for a fact these things exist, but these things, I mean like the things that I saw, I have no explanation for. This incident happened about 4 years ago when I was 16. It was the middle of the night, and I was asleep and not alone. I had my sister sleeping in the same room. All of a sudden, I was awoken by something grabbing my thigh, and I sat up immediately. All I could see is a hand grabbing me tightly, and a figure covered in my blanket. I tried screaming, but I was aware my voice wasn't coming out at all. I tried waking up my sister, but couldn't even reach her. One thing I was wondering the whole time was if it was real or just a dream. So I started to notice every small detail I usually don't remember about my room, like how I placed my pens that night on my table, or how I threw my pile of clothes on a chair, and I started to pray to Humamu, as I'm Hindu, and I had a bright light behind me, and I could see some shadows projecting on my wall, and then the figure, hidden in my blankets, was sucked down, and I passed out. I woke up immediately and looked around, and everything seemed just the way I remembered. 2 days passed, and I had the biggest bruise on that same thigh, and as days passed, when it was starting to fade, the bruise took a shape of a hand with long fingers. I always thought it was a very creepy experience. This story is what I usually call the scariest day of my life. I was having a sleepover at one of my friends' houses. There were 3 of us, and for some reason we began telling scary stories earlier that day. We decided to play Charlie Charlie, which is a classic ghost game to keep the scary mood up. However, something strange began to occur. It actually worked. and we began talking with a spirit called Charlie. Now at first we didn't mind, and my friends didn't believe it, but one of my friends called Bob decided to make fun of the spirit, which is something you should never do. I then asked the spirit if it was angry, and it said yes. Directly after this there was an earthquake. Now earthquakes where I live are so incredibly rare that there have only been about 3 in the past 20 years in this area of my country combined. So the fact that this earthquake happened at the exact moment could be coincidental, but mathematically, it's not likely. After this, the scary stuff began to happen. First of all, I saw a shadow creature standing behind us. Next, my friend freaked out because they saw something they described as a white, hairless creature with black eyes and a large mouth. We decided to hide in our room and lock the door. But then we heard something breathing under the bed. Then we heard scratching from under there. The house is my second friend, Nathan's. Nathan said the sound didn't sound natural, like it couldn't have been the wind or anything. We got freaked and all had to go onto the top bunk, and it was very uncomfortable. But in the end, it wasn't even the end of it. In the morning, I saw things like moving shadows without people, my shadow becoming its own being and walking away, and my friend claims they saw a massive 2-headed dog and a slender man-like creature. But here's the thing, we're in the middle of nowhere. We were too young to drink and smoke and didn't get high or anything. I don't know what happened that day, but both of my friends clearly remember everything that happened, and we all share the exact same wild story every time we bring it up. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Now follow me on Twitter. You know you should, and just open your phone. Good, yep, at Mortis Media. Well, good job, well done. Capital, I like that. You did a great thing. You can do it on Instagram as well if you want. Optional, but also good. Hope everyone here's had a good night. Yeah, that's it. That's the video. I don't really know what to say anymore. Thank you to all my lovely members and patrons, whose names can be seen on screen. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. All is good here. My voice is a little... not sure why. But there you go. It's just like that some days, isn't it? Alright then guys, for now, take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.